With the Angels of the Zariman update, Warframe has found itself getting a much-needed overhaul to some of the older systems and interactions in the game, namely Focus Schools, Operator and Warframe Synergy, and of course the XMI units. Now, while many of these changes have been divisive, in my opinion, they've all been needed. The current issue is the degree of implementation. The new Void Sling versus Void Dash debate can be most easily solved by introducing a toggle. Things like Void Strike can be tuned to better incorporate the ones of Eidolon Hunters, and delays on things like Magus Anomaly can hopefully be addressed. That just leaves the XMI, and that's what we'll be talking about today, so get cozy, turn out, because we're about to get into it. Reworked XMI, and by association, the slow death of CC and Warframe. I wanted to be clear that while I think the system is currently flawed, that the foundations of it are sound. The new XMI do add a new and much needed level of engagement to the game, but it doesn't take into account a few key factors. That being said, this video is going to be split into two parts for, better digestibility and ease of understanding. Part 1 is going to be my general frustrations with the new system and where it can be improved. Part 2 is going to be focused specifically on how CC is currently dying in Warframe and why, to me, that's a bad thing. Currently, there are two big issues with the new XMI. They're fun, they're engaging, they're kinda everywhere, and they're a lot, and that's a problem. Number one is density, especially when considering the solo community and the endurance level capping communities on the Steel Path. Though in this case, the Steel Path merely acts to highlight the problem. Number two is the Leeches, who I'm gonna call Eels, which are energy leeches because they're annoying, and the health leeches, which are just health leeches. I can't think of anything cool, maybe heals, but then it's a little confusing. The problem of density is one that can be broken down into two sections: mission type and map style. For instance, the likes of capture, exterminate, rescue, or sabotage, density becomes a far less of an issue due to how spawns typically work in Warframe. Outside of fissures, all units spawn from a particular location and have to physically move to point A to point B. This means travel time. When you combine this with the mission types that are also based on constant movement, that means the density typically remains fairly low unless you have an exceptionally high time to kill rate, meaning you take a really long time to make things die. Game modes that rely on movement don't get nearly as overwhelmed by the new units, and as such, I don't have the same problems as I have on, let's say, survival. Game modes like survival, defense, interception, and even to a certain extent disruption all fall privy to a sense of much higher density due to the stagnant nature of these game modes. In survival, you typically are setting up shop in one room and holding up there against the apocalypse, which, my goodness, it certainly feels like has arrived now. In defense, while you get the reprieve of rounds, it literally is one room and one target you're to defend with your life. Interception, while varying in map size, falls under the same boat as defense, with there being no way to truly curtail the flow of enemies because there's only one place to go. Disruptions are typically played like slightly bigger survivals with greater scaling, so while density issues may not be entirely universal, it's definitely a game mode that will feel this density issue more. The variation on how badly this density is felt can be further broken down by map style. What this really means is how much verticality the map utilizes, which typically means that the map is newer. Most of these game modes exist solely on game maps that have existed since near the dawn of time, with the only notable map updates being to Jupiter and Corpus cruise ships. This means that the majority of the rest of them employ a much liberal use of verticality, utilizing straight shots and linear corridors, which also means that the enemies have less obstruction, which means getting to you then can feel a lot more congested, and it can get a lot more congested faster, and would be the main reason for certain, let's say, disruption maps feeling way worse than others. Greener maps are particularly awful for this. Now, there are a couple main downsides to this density issue, namely visual clutter and lack of reprieve. It's hard to see, which can be taxing on systems, like my brain. I can't see, and I have migraines. Anyway, but beyond that, it makes it difficult to actually react appropriately to these enemies, which to my understanding was one of the main things that this update was meant to be addressed, which, visibility. It doesn't matter if the aura on the enemy is more visible if there are so many abilities happening at one time that you can't actually see the enemy it's originating from. The other main downside is by extension lack of reaction time. We've all these new ways to avoid an Eximus ability, like rolling through them, or rolling through them. Okay, so that's actually not that many, but yeah, I think that's kind of the main way you just kind of dodge. You're meant to dodge. Can't really dodge when there's so much happening. Yeah, anyway, but in a lot of these opportunities, you don't have the opportunity to do so, like I said. So instead, you kind of just get pushed back into the old thing that you do, which is hit an iframe, and then you use a big AoE, boom, 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 and bada bing, bada boom. You just hope that everything got cleared, and you get about 2 seconds to breathe, which, spoiler alert, you really don't. This segues into the next point, which is specifically energy and health leeches. Hello, eels, and yet to be named health leeches, which we guess we can call heals for now. Pardon the confusion, they do not heal you, so there's some poetic irony there. These are the two units that have, in my, and pretty much everyone I've talked to's opinion, been the most problematic. The new energy leeches being the worst. In the case of eels, they've been buffed beyond it being an energy drain, but to specifically a mag proc, which then disrupts your ability to cast energy, shields, and to a certain extent vision, which is a lot more than just a little energy sucky. Let me tell you. A lot worse. Eels, whereas can affect your Warframe when in your operator, they can affect your operator, and then they can also affect your Warframe when you transfer back into them. Which is really punishing. Health leeches, while not causing nearly the same amount of frustration, spawn zoning puddles that are high in number and duration. Both don't require line of sight from my testing to start casting on you, and both utilize verticality in both their pool shape, which I'm pretty sure is a sphere, and I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure it's a sphere. And that makes dodging more difficult, and the fact that these things can also be cast into the sky, and by association, they can also be cast a million miles away from them, upstairs, down corridors, and corners that you don't even know they exist. And none of this is inherently bad, except really the last part. That part's bad. I don't mind punishing game mechanics. The problem is these abilities are cast too frequently, and the rate at which these units spawn is also, again, too frequent. I get rid of one, and another has already arrived to continue where the first left off. And due to the distance these casts can go, and the fact that I know these abilities don't need continuous vision, I can't even be sure of their location most of the time. My biggest suggestion when it comes to the Eximi right now is that they take a look at density, which also feels higher than before when it was supposedly lowered. Now, I obviously don't know the numbers, I'm just going based off of what I've experienced, and maybe part of this is the fact that no one is safe from abilities at any time, since they even go through Olympos Rift all the time, and that they tweak the frequency of Eximi spawns and cater them more specifically to mission type. Again, I feel that modes like Void Cascade, for instance, the density is fine, but for the majority of older infinite mission types, the density is insane. In general, the Leech series needs to be looked at again. There are too many, too often, with too little reprieve. Furthermore, either these abilities need their potencies to be decreased to justify their frequency, or their frequency needs to go down to justify their potency. I'd personally suggest the latter. Have the duration of health drain pools decrease while the ability cooldown increases. Have line of sight to be a requirement so that you know for sure the unit is at least on the same level as you and not casting from 30 meters beneath you. Increase the cooldown on the energy ability being recast, and slightly increase the amount of time one has to evade it. These would make them much more tolerable and justify the brutality you feel when you fail to defend. I don't think these numbers need to be drastically tweaked in terms of reaction time, even at 0.5 to 1 second for eels, and I think we'd be fine.